All right, chapter 15.2 is going to be a really quick chapter. It's basically on pre-Darwin and what the thoughts were about species and just how everything came to be before Darwin. And there's some points here that might actually kind of surprise you. And again, I don't have you take many notes on this because it's really just like the history, and I'd rather you focus on the processes of evolution rather than this history. I enjoy this history. This is one of the parts I really geek out on, but basically before Darwin, if you think back again, thousands of years, during the Greek times. Plato and Aristotle propose that species come in their perfect form, and that they essentially were always there, and that they were unchanged, and they're just perfect. Obviously, we know that's not the case. And you can see even here we have this classification of like non-living things and trees and animals and human beings being at the top. We know that that's not correct. It's we are one species out of all the species, and it's not that we are more complex. It's just we are one of the thousands and millions of species out there. Next was Carlos Linnaeus. He started identifying the species in the sense of he wanted to put them in like a taxonomical order. He was a big proponent of the binomial nomenclature, which he actually produced. We'll talk more about him in chapter 19, but basically, he started organizing them, the species, using this nomenclature. One of the crazy things is he didn't accept evolution and that species change. Up until this point, we start seeing a change in ideology that hey, species they might change from time period to time period, but it was a growing idea. Carlos Linnaeus was a very religious man. He actually one of his quotes was, "God created, Linnaeus organized." I think something along those lines. But basically, just said, "Yeah, everything's in the perfect order, and I'm just going to label everything with my binomial nomenclature." And it was a really good naming system for the time. Leclerc, this is another naturalist again in the before the 1800s. He did propose that the species would change due to environmental factors. However, he did believe in special creation, that everything was produced thousands of years ago. Darwin said, you can see here that the first author who in modern times had treated evolution in a scientific spirit was Leclerc. So he actually, being Darwin actually thought that Leclerc really, spurred his ideas into this idea of evolution. So what I'm trying to get across here is Darwin's not the first person to think about evolution. Darwin was not the first. He was almost kind of late to the game. Even his grandfather played around with the idea. I think he's next. Yeah, Erasmus Darwin even played around with the idea that species were things, I should say, or organisms evolve. If you look here, this is in his journal. This is in Erasmus Darwin. This is his grandfather. The final course of this contest among males seems to be that the strongest and most active animals should propagate the species, which should thus be improved. That sounds like evolution. That sounds like natural selection. But again, he didn't really dive into the mechanism of natural selection. So it wasn't Darwin that really was the first to talk about evolution. That's a lot of people think. It's just that he was the most correct on the mechanism that powered evolution. Cuvier here, he is one of my favorites because he is like the founder of paleontology. He also opposed evolution. So a lot of these people didn't accept evolution because they thought everything was just perfect because of their religious upbringing at the time. And he supported something called catastrophism. And this is that the Earth was created with violent and very quick, like meteors and volcanoes, eruptions, things like this. So he basically was saying, the Earth formed very quickly, but he also was looking at more geology at the time as well. Along comes James Hutton and Charles Lyell. These two individuals kind of revolutionized the evolutionary thinking in the sense of they produce modern geology. That the Earth is very old, and the Earth has taken billions of years to get to where it's at today. So again, they propose deep time, and they propose that this concept of, we're going to get to it next here. Here we go. Uniformitarianism, and this is the process where it's slow, uniform, and continuous processes are responsible for Earth's physical features today. So this is like weathering. This is how I'm going to go back a couple slides here if I can. This is how these lines occur in like the I can't even think of the name. The Grand Canyon. There we go. Basically, these lines were over thousands of years of this river cutting through the hard rock bed. You can see here these lines being produced over millions of years. He saw these lines in the coastlines of some of the areas he was going around, and he was saying, "Hey, it's not just the Earth was created in a couple thousand years. It's that the Earth is millions to billions of years old." And hopefully, we did the activity when you're watching this that the Earth universe is 13.8 billion years, Earth is about 4.5 billion years, and life on Earth is about 3.8 billion years old. So, life on Earth is very, very old. Now, another scientist that I would like you to know about is Jean Baptiste de Lamarck, and just know him as Lamarck. Basically, he was the first biologist to offer a testable hypothesis that explained how evolution occurred. He was really right, and there's actually some like more push for him today because he kind of described things in the like the epigenetic way, and it's actually coming out like he did kind of maybe was a little bit right, but not in the sense that Darwin was. Darwin's again just did a great job with describing natural selection. Anyway, back to Lamarck. Lamarck said that the more complex organisms are descendant of less complex organisms. We're going to talk about that when we talk about the evidence of evolution. So the first organisms were very simple. Now life is a lot more complex. He also thought that adaptations were the driving force of evolution. That's correct. Yeah, he was right. And then he also thought that the characteristics are inherited from parent to offspring. So from the parent going to the offspring, they're passing down the genetics. Again, he was really right, except for one thing. He thought that organisms could pass on inheritance that were acquired. So, like, let's say I'm going to give you a very wrong example of this, but let's say I have an arm that gets cut off. Then my kid would then have an arm that would be cut off. Or let's say I have a scar on my face, and then my next generation, I would also have a scar on my face. Not the case. And if you remember, he used the giraffe analogy where the giraffes would kind of stretch out their necks, and the next generation would have that little stretched out neck. And then, generation after generation, this is how we have this longer neck in the giraffe. And that's not the case. We're going to talk about why that's not the case in the next chapter with Darwin. But he essentially said that, or Lamarck said, hey, acquired traits are passed on. And that's not true. All right, Thomas Malthus. Some of the if you're in like another AP, I think one of the world history APs, Thomas Malthus is brought up. But basically, he was an economist that looked at like populations and how these populations worked within like resources. He did other stuff. Don't get me wrong. He did other stuff. But basically, what he said was the organisms have more offspring that can survive, and the competition between the offspring are going to lead to some surviving and some dying off. And if you look at this chart, or this graph here, you can see we have this food production line, and there's only so much growth that can occur before the population starts dying because there's just not enough food. So basically, this is just kind of setting the pace for evolution, where there's just not enough resources for everyone to survive. So certain organisms are going to survive better and pass on their genes more, and other organisms are not. Now, Malthus didn't say that specifically, but he gave Darwin the idea because, again, Darwin was reading Malthus's book before he went on the voyage, which we're going to talk about next week in chapter 15.3. And basically, what we're saying here again, like this is a perfect example. Elephants can live to 100 years. Their breeding span is 30 to 90 years. One elephant can produce 6 offspring in their lifetime. A pair of elephants in 750 years can produce 19 million elephants. That's, again, there's no way we have 19 million elephants. It's because a lot of the offspring die off. Not many of the offspring are going to make it to adulthood in any sense or any really species. It's not that every offspring make it to adulthood. Now, in humans, we see a lot more of it today because we have modern technology. But if you think about species just in general, apart from humans, a lot of species, their offspring die off. It just they're not going to make it to the reproduction age. So that competition is going to give Darwin and the the deep time is going to give Darwin kind of like the platform he needs for evolution and for natural selection.